Hello and welcome to the Hailey on the Daily podcast, where I make podcasts every day. I'm your host, Hailey Horvath. You know what I've been getting into lately? Podcasts. I know I make them, but I actually just started listening to other podcasts. It's really weird because I'm a huge visual person. Like, I love watching videos and seeing things in person, but when you find a good podcast, not having a visual almost doesn't even matter. I listen to podcasts all the time. I like to listen to them while I'm doing my makeup, going for a walk, or even just while cleaning my room. It's a great background noise. I'm really into listening to mysteries, crimes, murders, and things like that. But sometimes I listen to them late at night and it freaks me out. But anyway, a friend of mine not too long ago introduced me to the podcast called Serial. At first, it was so funny to me. I was like, I'm not listening to a podcast about food. I like mysteries. But then she said, no, it's not like that. It's like cereal, but with an S instead of a C. Talking about cereal with a C, this brings us in today's sponsors.
Lucky Charms! Stars and horseshoes, clovers and moons, hourglass and rainbows, and tasty red balloons!
Hi, Lucky. Thanks, Lucky. Gotta go. Uh-oh. Whoa. Hearts, stars, and horseshoes, clovers, and balloons, hourglasses, rainbows, and tasty red balloons. Lucky Charms!
Frantically delicious Lucky Charms cereal, part of a good breakfast.
Yes, that's it. Lucky Charms is a great way to start your day. Lucky Charms is now introducing the new red balloon marshmallow. Just by taking a photo of you and your child eating it, the red new balloon marshmallow, and submitting it to hashtag red balloon, you may have a chance to win over $10,000. Crazy. Now, let's get back to the podcast. So continue on, I was like, oh, cereal with an S is literally genius. So of course, I listened to it, and I've now finished the whole 12 episodes of the podcast, and wow, it was really good. I give it a 10 out of 10, and I'm telling you guys about it because you need to listen to it. The first reason you need to listen to this podcast is because the podcast includes real interviews between Sarah, the narrator, and Adam, the potential murderer, while he's still in prison. The first time Sarah interviews Adnan, in the first episode, he says, I just sometimes wish they could look into my brain and see how I really felt about her, while referring to the girl that he has been accused of killing. The last time Sarah interviews Adnan, in the 12th episode, he says, if there's anything about my case, I want to know it, while referring to the untested evidence. This is why you need to listen to this podcast, because every episode you get to listen to Adnan's perspective and opinion on the case, because during the trial he could not say his side at all. Therefore, Sarah is giving Adnan a voice while Adnan is being interviewed. You start to see who is really lying and who's actually being honest while telling what happened the day of the murder. The second reason you have to listen to the Serial podcast is because the podcast honors the life of Hae Min Lee. After Sarah was not able to get in touch with Hae's family, Sarah begins to talk about the kind of person Hailey was in the eyes of non-family members. And Sarah says, she was cheerful and light and funny. She loved the movie Titanic. She sometimes put nail polish on just so she could put it off. She wasn't insecure, seemingly ever. Sprite was her favorite soda. The Dallas Cowboys was her favorite team, not because she cared about football, but because she liked the colors blue and silver. She could charm you without trying. She was a good friend to her friends. She took in their problems, their pain, and tried to help them if she could. This demonstrates why you need to listen to this podcast, because it dives into Hailey. She was a person, and instead of just seeing her as a dead girl, as the author says, you feel her pain that the family must be going through, the discomfort of finding her murderer interesting as the viewer. You need to listen to this podcast to be able to understand the different perspectives and sides of the story. You need to know that Hailey was a beautiful soul. This murder does not define her, and the author did a great job explaining this and being persistent on the kind of person Hailey was. The third reason you need to listen to the Serial podcast is because the Serial podcast offers inside information and accesses on the murder case. Sarah, the narrator, hires a former homicide detective named Jim and asks him to rate the investigation. Jim then says, "This was better than average," when referring to how the case was investigated. Sarah and Dana attempt to also drive from Woodland High School to Best Buy in the 21 minutes. Sarah says, "We just did it in 22 minutes and 2 seconds." This is why you need to listen to the podcast, because Sarah brings us as listeners behind the scenes. Sarah hires someone to investigate the case to get a better understanding. Then Sarah and Dana also prove that Adnan could have made it from Woodlawn High School to Best Buy in the 21 minutes, because they did it in about 22. This podcast offers actual evidence because they test scenarios out for themselves. Sarah actually tries to prove if the scenarios work, or unlike the original team involved in the case. So, basically, to sum everything up, I really recommend you guys listening to the Serial podcast because there's real person-to-person interviews with the potential murderer. They honor and celebrate Heyman Lee's life, and because the podcast offers insider access to a murder case. It's very interesting and very addicting. But before I end this podcast, I want to end this podcast with a question. So I want you all to go and listen to the full 12 episodes of this podcast, and then next week, answer me this question. Do you think Adnan Syed is guilty of the murder of Heyman Lee? Let me know. I'm very curious. Also, next week, I will let you guys know my opinions on the topic as well. I want to say a huge thank you to Lucky Charms for sponsoring this video, and make sure to use the hashtag #RedBalloons. And then until next time, thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys again.